The world of CSS progress bars might have you really confused right now, but I want to make it a little bit easier for you. I'll go over how to create an accessible progress element with both the progress element itself and just a regular old div. There will be CSS tricks and shortcuts scattered throughout the entire video, and I'm going to be experimenting on purpose so that I fail, so that you get sort of an in-depth look into the thoughts that I have as I run into issues. On the left-hand side, I have all my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all set up, with a live server that's output on the right-hand side. To get started with the progress element, all you actually have to do is put on progress onto your HTML. Now this back and forth, it doesn't have a value, so it's actually called the indeterminate state. If I do add a value, I'll put in value 70, and we can see that, oh my gosh, it doesn't actually know the context of that value. So we can put a min and a max. So we'll say the min is 0 and the max is 100. So this is saying 70 out of 100. It's always good practice to add a label to this element. So if you have a visual label that you can add to your HTML, you can say label. Within that label, all you got to do is add 4 equals, and then this would be equal to your ID of the progress element. So we'll just say poop for clarity, and have an ID, if, of poop. If you don't have any sort of visual label that's in your design, you can also add an ARIA label that does the exact same thing. So ARIA label, poop, 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 progress. And of course we want to style this. So all we got to do is add on a class equals progress, head over to the styles.css, type in progress, open that up. The one property that we could use is called accent color. And we can set that to anything that we want. And this is going to change the color of this bar here, which if you're not going to change the styles too much is perfect. That kind of gets you what you want, right? But we want to go deeper here. We want to go so deep in my jimmy jammies that it's all tightened up in my panties a bit. And to do that, we would actually add appearance none. And the strange thing is that actually got rid of the accent color property, which kind of is duty, right? But we have a way to style that progress bar, at least the green bar and the gray background. And that's with pseudo selectors, WebKit progress. Can you guess it? Value for the green and bar for the track. But we'll say background, let's say red. We want to mimic that red. Awesome. So again, accent color, it's not doing anything anymore. We can save it. And if we want to change the color of this track here, all we would have to do is say ba is equal to this EEE. A little bit later, yeah. Now you probably want to add in a bunch of other styles to this, not just such a simple little progress ba. So let's go ahead and add border radius. Border radius, we'll say, let's make it completely rounded off. Do 50 VW. Nothing happened, kind of weird. Right? But I think it's just because we need to cut off the corners. So overflow hidden, cut off the corners. If I put 50%, which is what you would do for circles, you get this weird kind of ellipse. And that ain't gonna fly in my house. So we'll say 50 VW, keep it nice and arbitrary. You probably do want to add in some borders and box shadows and all that kind of stuff. So we'll put in border, 2 pixels solid. Let's do like a dark gray. Okay, so it inset inside of the progress bar, which is interesting. It didn't add to the height. And 2 pixels, you know, if it's a small value, 1 pixel, 2 pixel, and it's for a hairline border or something like that, it's completely fine to use pixels. Although if you wanted it to scale with the browser, you could use rems in that instance. What if I want there to be an inset around this red value here, a white inset that matches the width of the border? Do you think box shadow is going to work here? We'll check out box shadow, inset. It didn't work, which is strange because I would assume that box shadow would be inside of the container, right? But it didn't work. So what we can do instead of doing that is let's see what happens when we put this over on the progress bar. And for the progress bar, that was the white area or this gray area here. Okay, so that sort of works. If I do border radius inherit, is it gonna nuke this sort of square edge that we have here? Or I don't believe it will, but it's worth trying, you know? Delete that. Put it on the background red and see what happens. Okay, so you see we have a little edge here. We definitely don't want that edge there. And we also have the square corners on this one too. So we don't want either of those. So how do we get that inset? And I would say my answer this time would be to get rid of border in this case and use box shadow altogether. So we would specify an outer shadow of 2 pixels of white, and then another outer shadow that's layered beneath that of the darker shade that we want. And save that. Boom, we got it perfect. The one thing to note here is if your container is right here, that means your progress bar is going to be 4 pixels outside of your container. The other thing I've noticed in a lot of progress bars is the edge here is actually rounded to match the left and the right of the progress bar container. So all we got to do is go down to the value here, that's background red at the moment, and say border radius 50 VW. We can't use inherit, oh boy, but matching that same border radius will get us the same effect. I've actually seen the progress bar with the value inside of it. So how would we do that without adding additional markup? And the way to do that was you would actually just add in a progress and use the pseudo element. Within the pseudo element, we'd say content attribute. And here we can pull any HTML attribute that's on our progress element right now. ARIA label, class, ID, max, min, and value. So of course we want the value in this instance. So we'll say content equals value, and we'll have to do some stacking here. So let's add in position absolute. Boop, save it. Good. It stays in place, but we may want to add some additional values to make sure that the text can center correctly. Top 50%, which says move on the y-axis 50% of the height of the parent, which is the progress bar. We'll say left 0 and save it. And the problem here is I didn't put position relative on the progress element. So position absolute is like, where do I go? I don't know. But now it's stuck to that progress element. And to center it based on the height of this before, we can use the transform translate value. Translate, we'll say y in this instance. We want to be moving on the y-axis, perfectly centered, awesome. Just to show you what would happen if I would change the font size, we'll say font size, something real big, maybe not real big, 2 rem, that's pretty big. See, nice and centered. If we got rid of this, where would it be in our progress element? Not centered, so we don't want that. We want to put those values back. Awesome. Of course, if you wanted to add some padding, that's totally cool too. So we'll just say padding 1 rem, give it a little offset. Oh, quite extreme. Maybe just say 0.25. Awesome. If you wanted to add in the % character, all you would have to do is do single quotes and add in the % character. As simple as that, y'all. If we were to change the value in our HTML, it would be perfectly reflected within our output on the right. But there is one thing that we neglected this entire process, and that's actually the indeterminate state. How do we get that to animate and to also have this nice little fixed state that we have here, this determinate state? And the way to do that is to actually hook in within CSS to this value attribute. The one thing that we certainly don't want an indeterminate state to have is the value being shown on the page. So all we would have to do is say, if there's a value, display the value. And it's working perfectly now, but let's say we take off this value, what happens? It's gone. Oh my gosh. Okay. So how do we address that? Let's experiment with how to add that indeterminate state. So the first thing that I want to try is to say when there's no value, do something to the value. So when there's not value, when there's not a value, add in a width to see if we can get that red to show back up. And it doesn't work. Maybe if we add a box shadow, there's some things going on in the hood that I don't know about. No. Okay. So we can't use value at all. Can we use bar to get the indeterminate state? So let's check that out. We'll say progress not value, progress, not value, WebKit progress bar. And I believe we could just change it to red and make it that. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Though if we change this to animation, and oh no, let's add in a linear gradient first. We'll add in a linear gradient. I love me some linear gradients. To the right, we want it to start from the left and go to the right. Red, E. Save that. We get a little fade. We want it to stop. We want to do a hard stop and mimic that linear gradient. So we'll copy over the red and do it at a 50%. We'll say when it gets to 50%, do a hard stop. Oh, I broke it. Remember your commas too. We can actually simplify this a little bit more. Take off the red, take off that last E, and that just kind of makes some assumptions in the background for you. Let's see if we can animate this. We'll put in animation, progress, bar, animation. 1 second, infinite. That'll go forever and ever until your heart's content. Keyframes, and we'll copy over that animation name. Open that up and say from the default state to halfway point, do something. So what are we going to do? Let's do background position. We'll start simple. Let's see if it moves at all. On the x-axis, move. Oh, okay. Didn't do anything. And my fear is that we can't animate this at all, which would really, really suck. Let's break it down and let's try to use a property we know is going to work. So we'll say box shadow, inset 0, inset 0, 2 pixels. We'll do a black. And then we want to animate to what color? We'll say blue. And is that going to work? No, that didn't work. So animation doesn't work on this either. So what can we do? Let's remove the animation and try out the... I want to delete it actually altogether. We know we can use the before, but let's see if we can maybe change the background of progress, which I don't believe would work. Say red. Yeah, that didn't work. So we could actually use the after pseudo selector. So we'll delete this, head over to add in after, and then we want it to cover. So we'll cover up the progress element. Absolute, top 0, left 0, height 100%, width 100%. Make sure there's content on it with an empty string so that the element appears in the DOM. Then we can say background red. How come it didn't do what I want? Background progress value. Because I put progress value. Make sure you check your selector. So when there's not a value, make sure there's an after. Awesome. In fact, wait, if there's no before wouldn't have any styles, so we could technically use before and get the same thing. And I know a few of you looked at this and you're like, I know an easier way. Yeah, I got you covered. Inset 0, and then delete the height and the width, and we'll have the same effect. Awesome. So now our element is covering over the linear progress bar, but we want it to animate infinitely, right? For the indeterminate state. So because it's an entire element, we actually get a lot more room to play around with. So we could just say width 50%, have it be 50% of the width, and then just animate that infinitely. So we'll say animation, progress, before, I'm very creative, infinite. Do some keyframes. What did I put? Progress before. Progress before as my animation name. To 50%. What are we going to do? We'll say transform, translate, on the x-axis, 100% of its own width. It didn't work. Why didn't that work? Animation, progress before, 1 second, infinite. Translate X. Oh, I always do translate in general. Okay, awesome. Oh, we don't want it to do that. Oh, that looks terrible. Oh, that looks really bad. We can set it to maybe move out of the container first. So it's by default going to be outside. And then at the end state, we don't want it to show up at all, right? We would just do, what would we do? 200? Okay, and that goes back and forth. And that drives me up a wall, right? So let's get rid of that effect as well. So I don't gouge out your eyeballs. Let's do it really slow too. All we got to do is to 100. So it's saying from the left to the right. Don't do any in between. What are you talking about? Don't go back and forth. And then because of the easing that we set, you can see it's slowly moving in to the right-hand side, very slowly and deviously. So we can just put in linear as the easing method. Is that what it's called? Easing method. So now it's a very nice smooth. We'll add in 1 second back. And maybe if we wanted to go a little bit further, we could put in a skew 15 degrees. Oh, and it's going from skew 15 degrees to 0 because I didn't specify it here. So we'll say skew, let's do a negative. It's like super extreme. Ooh, I feel like it's like a really nice wipe. Okay, we'll get rid of this so it doesn't cause any distractions. And the interesting thing is you can actually see it bleed out a little bit because I added this skew. So maybe we'll get rid of that if you're doing it in your project. So with the progress element, you get a ton of cool stuff and for not that much work. But what if you wanted to actually just use a div instead and have total control over your styles? Let's head back over to the HTML. All we got to do is actually change this to div and then add in a role. And that role would be progress bar. Progress bar. Now this is going to be semantically the same as our progress. But the strange thing is there's no min and max within this div though. That's not an attribute that exists. So we'll delete that as well. And as for the label, same rules apply. Either use a form element or use this ARIA label. Before we get into the JavaScript, let's try to mangle this around and see if we can get the same thing. So we'll delete everything, all this hard and beautiful work. We'll delete it all. Delete it. Save. It looks like I might need to add a height in. So we'll add height 1 rem. That's a big one. No need to do a width because it's a block level element. Border radius, we can keep the same. Appearance none. There's no form styles to nuke. So we can get rid of that too. And there's nothing absolute within it, so we can get rid of that as well. And for overflow hidden, I believe we can get rid of that too. And even better, I think this box shadow is going to respect us this time. So we'll put in border 2 pixels solid EEE DDD DDD DDD. And you can see that it's sort of like inset a little bit, and that was what I was talking about, where the box shadow would actually overlay. It would actually break out of the container that it's within. To get the actual track, we could add a background here instead of on that pseudo element. So we'll say background EEE and put in that box shadow to get the inset. So box shadow inset 000 2 pixels FFF, which is a white. And then all we got to do is put in a before. So progress before and position absolute. There's actually more tricks to that. Top left. So this will completely cover, but we got to make sure that we have content so that it's active, and then background red. Oh my God, okay. Well, you got to add position relative. Make sure it's stuck to that progress bar. And well, looks like we needed to add overflow hidden anyway, so we'll add overflow hidden. Though the cool thing is if we deleted this, delete it, put in border radius, we can actually just inherit what the parent was. And in fact, forget this freaking covering stuff. Let's just do the inset 0 again, because it's so much cleaner, I'd say. Same result, but how do we clip it? We want it to be, let's say 70%. How would we do that? And there's actually a ton of ways that you can do that. You could say transform scale X 0.7. That would do the trick. But the weird thing is you have to put a transform origin to say, hey, you better be squishing me from the left. And the other thing that happened is you can actually see the radius changed as well. Something to think about. Or instead of this transform business, you could do clip path. So we'll say clip path, polygon. And with a polygon, I'll show you how it works. We'll go to clip path generator, and you basically select a bunch of points given a % value within our container. So of course we want to clip it at a certain point on the right hand side. So let's do just that. So we'll say right on the upper left, X and the Y axis, go all the way over to the right, 50%, stay 0 on the Y axis, and do the same for the bottom right, and then all the way to 0, 100%. Yeah, we got our clippings going on here. So if we change it to 70%, what do we get? 70% of the width of our progress bar, which is exactly what we want. The one thing I just noticed is I actually want this inset to clip this red here. So if I do box shadow inherit, I would get the same box shadow as before as its parent, but you can see there's like a little clip here. So we might actually have to apply the same trick as before, or we could do some kind of outline using the after selector. So I'm sorry, but Mr. Border, I'm gonna have to delete you again and change from inset to outset 0, 0, and 4 pixels DDD. Cool. Are there other ways we can do this? You bet your darn tootie. Let's get rid of clip path and put in background linear gradient, my favorite of all. Linear gradient to right, and then we'll say same thing, red to EEE, close that off with a semicolon. Need to put in my stops, so I'll put in 50%, 50%. Awesome. And what happens if we change this value? 60%. Could we go all the way to 100%? You bet your darn butt. And if we do background size, we can actually limit that as well. So background size, 50%, 100%. So 50% width, 100% height. And that didn't work. Why? Why didn't that work? I feel like that should work. If I do pixels, does that work? Oh, okay. The problem is it's repeating. So background repeat, no repeat. We don't want that sucker to repeat. And if I put my 50% back, yes, okay, it works perfectly. So we can either set different stop levels here, or we can set a background size here, be 60%, 70%, 90% to get the same effect as all the others. There's another way we could do this, and that's background position. So we would keep background repeat, no repeat, but if we do background position, can we make it move over all the way? Let's see if that works. That didn't work. If I do a pixel value or rems or something, it starts to work. That same limitation is actually shared with box shadow as well. So if we wanted to do box shadow inset 50%, negative 50%, 0, 0, 0, red, it didn't work. And that's because it shares the same limitation. You can't use % values. And of course, 50 rem is huge. So I just removed that, and we can keep going, making it bigger and bigger. The strange thing is it actually like mimics the border radius. So definitely not something you want to play with there unless you flipped it. So we'll have our, okay, let's keep this going. I'm going to do it. You get what hopefully someone gets it. This is the value. This is the track, and you're removing parts of the track as you go along. So it would be 4, we're getting there, 3, we're getting there, we're getting there. Kind of the same effect, right? But there's a small hairline of red that's going on the right-hand side, and that's kind of gross, right? There's actually another trick, and it's extremely dirty, but I'm going to do it just so that you can see what's going on. I'll keep everything here and add in display grid. Weird, right? What I'm going over here is you can actually put in columns representing your % values. So 100 divided by 10, we'll just say repeat 10, 1FR. So there are 10 fractional units to this grid. Now if we look and inspect it, we'll see there's 10 little squares going from the left to the right. And we can move this before based on those grid columns. So grid column, we'll say starts on the first column, ends on the third column. Save it. Nothing happened. Why? That should technically work. I wonder why it didn't work. Hold on. So if we go in here, the before, it worked. Don't do that. Make your track what you want it to be. Make your value the real juice. Awesome. So this again gets us what we want. And maybe let's take it to the 70%. Right. So now we have even another way to do this, even though it's pretty darn dirty, I'd say. So let's get straight to the point and use my favorite method for this. And that's actually transform, translate on the x-axis, negative 100%. Gets us over to the left-hand side. All we got to do is, of course, remove that. Overflow, hidden. Now our value is hidden. And how do we represent that within percent is all we have to do is subtract the value from this value. So let's say it's 10%. We would say 90. 20% would be 80. Cool. The final thing we have to do is we have to hook up our JavaScript up to our HTML so that the value can then be used within CSS. So let's head over to the JavaScript, which is linked to the HTML file, and type in var progress equals document.query selector. And then we'll add in the class of our progress bar. The first and only thing we'll do is set a custom property on this progress element. So we'll say progress.style, set property. We'll say value because, hey, that's actually pretty descriptive. It matches the HTML attribute equal to 70. We'll save it. Nothing happened because we haven't hooked it up. It's certainly not going to show up in our HTML file. And certainly not going to show up here too. So let's check the rendered element and see that our style is now value equals 70. Now we can use that custom property however we want within our CSS. So let's head over to the CSS. And then where we said negative 80%, we'll bring that 100% back and say subtract the value times 1%. Because there's no percent attached to it, but we need to do some calculations based on that. So based on the order of operations, this might get a little whack. So we'll add another parenthesis and close this up to make it a little more readable. That certainly didn't work. Open up the before. It's not valid. Do we just need to add another? Yes, that's it. Awesome. But that's not what we want either, right? We want it to be negative. So I think it's negative minus plus. Yes. Math is good. Awesome. It worked exactly the way we wanted it to after a little, massaging of some math values there. And I can say transition. So let's transition the transform 200 milliseconds. Save it. Of course, nothing's going to happen, but if I change this value, you can see that, hey, it's incrementing the way we want it. Boop, 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 boop. Pretty cool, right? So there you have it, a few ways to style the progress element itself, and a few ways to mimic the progress element using just a regular old div. And as always, glad to have you here. If you want to talk about anything, Tetris, Monsanto, K-pop, CSS, let me know. See ya!
Now go see some K-pop, yeah.